A homeless man built a life in the snowy mountains. Then his dog found a cave. Under the ice, Rex didn't bark the night Caleb's world collapsed. He waited. He listened. And when the ice finally cracked open to reveal the truth Caleb had spent a lifetime running from, the dog didn't hesitate. He walked toward it. Some say dogs sense danger. But Rex wasn't warning Caleb about what could hurt him. He was guiding him back to what he had buried, a past frozen beneath the mountains, and a boy who shouldn't have survived. This is the story of how a homeless man lost everything, and how his dog found the one thing the mountain refused to keep hidden. What happened under the ice changed all of them forever. Snow fell over Cedar Ridge in slow, heavy sheets, the kind that muted sound and made a man feel like he was disappearing even while standing still. Caleb Moore watched it fall from the porch of what used to be his house, the foreclosure notice pinned to the door, flapping against the frame like a final insult. Christmas week. 25 years in this town, reduced to a red stamp and a stranger's signature. Beside him, Rex sat rigid, tail low, ears tilted forward as if listening to something Caleb could not hear. The dog's breath rose in thick, steady plumes. His amber eyes stayed locked on the tree line across the road. "I know," Caleb murmured, nudging Rex's shoulder with his knee. "It's over. Let it go." But Rex didn't let go. His growl was soft at first, then deepened, rolling through his chest like distant thunder. Caleb followed his gaze. At first he saw nothing but shadows between pines. Then a shape moved, a flicker of dark against white. Someone watching. When Caleb blinked, the figure was gone. A week earlier he might have called out. Now he had no energy left to care. Sarah had packed her things and left before the bank did. 2 blows in a row, and the world simply kept spinning as if he weren't standing in the ruins of the life he built with his own hands. He picked up Rex's leash but didn't clip it on. The dog never needed one. They walked toward the old truck parked by the curb, snow piling on the hood. Caleb tossed his last duffel bag into the back seat and climbed in. Rex jumped in after him, shaking flakes off his back. The engine coughed awake. Heat barely dribbled through the vents. Caleb leaned back, closed his eyes, and tried to breathe in a way that didn't hurt. By the time sleep dragged him under, Rex had shifted to the passenger seat, watching the woods like a sentry. At dawn, Caleb woke shivering, frost webbing across the inside of the windshield. Rex was already upright, hackles up, staring through the glass at something outside. Caleb followed his stare and felt his chest tighten. Footprints. Human. Fresh. They circled the truck once, came close enough to fog the metal with breath, then led toward the slope rising into the mountains. No tire tracks, no other marks, as if whoever made them had appeared and vanished in the same moment. Caleb stepped out, boots crunching. The air tasted like metal. Rex stayed close, unusually close, brushing Caleb's leg with every movement. Not fear, protection. All this for a man who had nowhere left to fall. He rubbed his hands together and let out a sigh that felt older than he was. He didn't want to walk back into town, didn't want pitying looks or whispered questions about Sarah, didn't want the same diner booth where he and his father had once eaten pie after long days of work. Everything familiar had turned into a reminder of what he no longer had. Rex nudged his arm, then looked west toward the distant silhouette of the Sawtooth Range. White peaks carved against a slate sky. Wild, empty, honest. Maybe the dog already knew what he needed before he said it out loud. "All right," Caleb whispered. "Let's go." The truck rattled onto the frozen road. As Cedar Ridge faded behind them, Rex turned in the seat and watched the rearview mirror for a long time, ears twitching with every passing shadow. The farther they drove, the more the world narrowed into snow, rock, and the low roar of winter wind. Caleb kept his eyes on the asphalt, but his thoughts drifted in places he'd avoided for years. his father's disappearance in these same mountains, the fights that had chipped away at his marriage, the creeping paralysis that comes when a man stops believing he deserves more. Rex barked once, sharp, sudden. Caleb jerked the wheel. "What is it, boy?" The dog stood, front paws on the dashboard, staring into the side mirror. Behind them, far down the winding road, a set of headlights glimmered through the snow. Too bright, too steady. Caleb's pulse kicked. No one drove out this way unless they had business, and he knew damn well no one had business with him. The headlights vanished as the road twisted, swallowed by the storm. Coincidence? Caleb muttered. But Rex didn't sit down. He stayed there, staring, muscles tight like a bowstring ready to snap. 2 hours later, the snow thickened, swallowing the world in white. Caleb slowed to a crawl. The forest pressed in on both sides, heavy branches sagging under ice. The road thinned until it was little more than a memory carved between drifts. Another bark, this one lower, urgent. Caleb saw it an instant later, a dark figure standing at the tree line ahead, half hidden by falling snow. Tall, still, unmistakably human. He slammed the brakes. The truck skidded, tires fighting for traction. When the vehicle finally lurched to a stop, the road ahead was empty. The figure was gone. Caleb swallowed hard. The wind bit through the cracked window. Rex's growl trembled through the cab. "We're leaving," Caleb whispered, throat tight. "Right now." He shifted gears, but as the truck lunged forward, something slammed against the tailgate. A heavy thud. Not metal. Not debris. Something alive. Rex snarled, spinning in circles, trying to see out every window at once. Caleb floored the gas. The truck fishtailed, then caught the road. He didn't look back. Couldn't. He drove until the outline of the Sawtooth Range rose around him like teeth, and the forest swallowed every sign of the world he used to know. Only when he reached the dead end of an old logging trail did he stop. Rex remained standing, chest heaving, eyes locked on the road they came from. "Yeah," Caleb whispered. "I saw it too." He stepped out, the cold carving into his lungs. The mountains towered overhead, vast and merciless, a place where men disappeared, where secrets froze solid, where the past buried itself and waited. He opened the truck bed, grabbed his pack, and slung it over his shoulder. "This is home now," he said, mostly to himself. But Rex was already ahead of him, nose to the wind, tail still, body tense with something sharper than fear. Instinct. Something out there had followed them, and whatever it was, the dog wasn't done warning him. The mountains swallowed sound in a way that made Caleb feel like an intruder, a man trespassing on something older than memory. Snow drifted through the pines as he hiked up the narrow trail, Rex cutting ahead with a confidence that seemed almost deliberate, as if he knew where they were going before Caleb had even decided. By midday, the wind eased, revealing a break in the trees. At the far end of the clearing sat what remained of a cabin, its roof collapsed inward, its stone foundation half buried under winter. Smoke-blackened beams leaned like ribs around an exposed hearth. Whoever built it had walked away a long time ago. Caleb's breath caught. His father used to speak about a miner's cabin somewhere in these mountains, a place he and his buddies had camped in during the late 70s. Caleb had been too young to understand then, and too angry later to care. Now the memory pressed into him like a thumb on a bruise. Rex trotted to the doorway and looked back, waiting. Snow clung to his fur, but his eyes were bright, sharp, questioning. "All right," Caleb said quietly. "Let's see what we can make of it." He spent the next hour clearing snow from the interior, dragging out rotten planks, kicking aside debris frozen into the dirt floor. The labor stung his hands, but it steadied him. Work always had. Build enough walls and maybe you could forget the ones that collapsed around you. Rex didn't rest once. He circled the clearing in slow arcs, pausing now and then to sniff at the ground. Not frantic. Focused. A soldier reading terrain. Caleb shoved aside a slab of broken timber. Beneath it, the ground seemed oddly smooth, almost packed. He knelt, brushed snow away, and froze. Rex had begun to dig. His paws moved with quick, precise strokes, sending shards of frozen dirt flying. Caleb reached out to stop him, but Rex twisted aside, gave a short growl, then continued digging with renewed intensity. "All right," Caleb murmured, sitting back on his heels. "Show me." Within minutes, something metallic glinted beneath the churned snow. Rex barked once, sharp and triumphant. Caleb pulled the object free, a rusted tin box, edges eaten by time. The lid resisted, then cracked open with a soft snap. Inside, wrapped in rotted cloth, was a knife. Not a hunting knife, not military, handmade. The handle worn smooth by years of use. And carved into the wood, faint but unmistakable, were 2 words. More Senior Caleb did not breathe for several seconds. His father had disappeared when Caleb was 9. No body recovered. No explanation offered beyond speculation and bottle-fed rumors. Sheriff Collins had once said men get swallowed by the mountains all the time, but he had never believed that entirely. Now he held proof that his father had stood right here. Rex nudged his elbow gently, almost reverent. Caleb closed his hand around the knife, the weight of it sinking into him like cold water. "Good boy," he whispered. "You found something you weren't supposed to." Rex's ears twitched. He turned sharply toward the back of the clearing, the direction the creek should have been. Snow muffled everything, but Caleb sensed a shift in the air, a faint vibration beneath the silence. "You hear that?" Caleb asked. Rex answered by sprinting towards the tree line. Caleb followed, boots slipping on packed frost. The trees opened into a narrow ravine carved by a shallow creek, now frozen solid. Rex stood at the center of it, paws planted on the thick sheet of ice, staring down as though he could see through it. The wind shifted and carried with it a sound so faint Caleb almost dismissed it. A soft echo. A dull thump. Something like a voice trapped under water. He crouched, pressed his glove against the ice. Beneath the cloudy surface, the frozen current wound through the rock bed, dark and still. Nothing moved. Nothing should have moved. Then the sound came again, a hollow, almost rhythmic pulse. Rex barked, not loud but urgent, warning mixed with invitation. Caleb's heart crawled into his throat. He bent lower, cheek nearly touching the ice, listening. The echo grew clearer for a moment, then vanished with the roll of distant thunder. Probably shifting ice, he told himself. But Rex didn't buy it. The dog stepped forward, placed both paws against a patch of ice near the center, and looked at Caleb with a fierce, impatient intensity. There was something here, something the dog understood before the man did. Caleb scanned the ravine. No signs of wildlife, no footprints, no tracks from the night before. The world felt paused, suspended between breaths. Rex whined, low and urgent, then tugged at Caleb's jacket, pulling him toward the creek's edge. "Easy," Caleb said, trying to steady his voice. "I'm coming." They followed the frozen stream for 20 yards until the walls narrowed into a funnel of rock and ice. A section of the creek had collapsed inward, forming a shallow dip in the surface. The ice there was thinner, tinged with an unnatural fog. Caleb knelt, brushing frost aside. Beneath the thin sheet, a dark void opened, stretching deeper than the creek bed should have allowed. A hollow space, a pocket, a cave. He felt it before he fully processed what he was seeing, the same instinctual jolt he used to feel when measuring a beam and realizing the whole frame was a fraction off. A wrongness subtle but undeniable. Rex pressed close, tail stiff, posture rigid. Keeper of secrets, guardian of thresholds. Caleb swallowed hard. His father had been here. Something beneath the ice had stirred, and now Rex stood between him and the truth like a sentry refusing to let him turn back. "All right," Caleb whispered. "Show me where this goes." But before he could take another step, a sharp crack split the air. The ice shuddered. A hairline fracture shot across the surface, racing toward his boots. Rex lunged, clamped his teeth around Caleb's sleeve, and yanked hard, pulling him back just as the ice gave way with a hollow roar. Cold mist surged upward. The ground trembled. Snow sifted down from the cliffs above. Caleb stumbled to his feet, chest heaving. The fracture widened, exposing the yawning mouth of the cave beneath, a dark throat descending to places sunlight hadn't touched in decades. Rex planted himself between Caleb and the opening, eyes blazing. Not yet. Not like this. Caleb stared at the dog, stunned at the clarity of the warning. He placed a trembling hand on Rex's head. "You knew something was under here, didn't you?" Rex didn't blink. The mountains had taken men before. Maybe they had given something back this time. And whether Caleb wanted it or not, Rex had just chosen a direction for both of them. By morning, the storm haze had thinned, leaving the clearing washed in a cold blue light. Caleb stood over the old foundation stones, breath curling upward, hands stiff from the night before. The knife with his father's name rested in his coat pocket, heavy in a way that felt almost intentional. A reminder. A nudge forward. Rex paced the perimeter with a precision that had become routine, nose sweeping the air, tail held low but steady. Every few seconds he paused and listened, as if measuring the silence for anything that did not belong. Caleb gathered what he could from the ruins of the collapsed cabin. Half-rotted beams, splintered planks, a hinge twisted into the shape of a question mark. Useless in town. But here, with enough patience and stubbornness, it could be turned into something that kept a man alive. He began rebuilding the floor frame first. Knees in the dirt, fingers raw, he drove old nails back into wood softened by decades of snow and thaw. Each hammer strike echoed across the clearing, bouncing off the wall of pines. Work steadied him, gave his mind a direction. Rex, though, never relaxed. Every time the wind shifted, Rex lifted his head sharply, gaze fixed on the tree line. When the sun slipped behind the western ridge, the dog grew restless. Ears tilted, muscles tight. "You're making me nervous," Caleb muttered. Rex didn't look away. Night crept in early. A thin veil of snow drifted down, catching the firelight in bright, trembling sparks. Caleb huddled near the flames, warming his hands while Rex sat at the edge of the light circle, staring into the dark as if waiting for something to step out. Caleb picked up a plank to brace the half-formed roof. The fire popped behind him, showering embers across the snow. He lifted the board, angled it toward the ridge beam, and Rex lunged. The dog barreled into his side with a force that knocked him clean off his feet. Caleb slammed into the snow, breath punched from his lungs. Rex barked once, sharp and furious. A heartbeat later, the ridge beam overhead cracked. A splintered chunk of roof dropped exactly where Caleb had been standing. It hit the ground with a heavy thud, scattering snow and broken nails. Caleb stared at the fallen timber, the realization cold and immediate. "You knew," he whispered. Rex didn't bark again. He simply pressed his head against Caleb's shoulder once, as if telling him that the warning had been obvious. Caleb rubbed Rex's neck with a shaky hand, unsettled by how close the beam had come and how quickly the dog had acted. "All right," he murmured. "I'll listen next time." The next day dawned grey and brittle. Caleb added braces to the remaining beams and cleared ice from the creek path. Work came slower now. Every few minutes he caught himself glancing toward the spot where Rex was patrolling. But today, Rex wasn't patrolling the tree line. He was standing in the frozen creek, paws planted on a sheet of ice that had cracked slightly since yesterday's storm. His body was rigid, tail lifted, the hair along his spine raised. He stared downward, unmoving. Caleb dropped the plank he was carrying. "What is it, boy?" Rex didn't look up. Instead, he stepped to the side, nose following a thin, jagged fissure weaving across the ice like a black vein. Caleb approached carefully, kneeling beside him. Beneath the surface, bubbles of frozen air formed clusters around a dark shape. Too dark for water, too still. Caleb put a glove flat against the ice. It felt colder than the air around it. But then he shifted his palm slightly and felt something else. Warmth, a soft, rising breath of warm air whispering through the crack. "That doesn't make sense," he murmured. Rex pressed his nose against the fissure and whined. A long, low sound. Not fear, not warning. Something closer to urgency. Caleb knocked lightly on the ice with his knuckles. The sound echoed down farther than it should have, hollow, wide. A space existed beneath them, bigger than the creek bed, bigger than a simple thaw pocket. A cave. The wind swept down the ravine, carrying with it the faintest echo. A dull thunk, or a breath of something shifting far below. Caleb couldn't be sure if he imagined it, but the sound prickled along his spine, subtle and unnerving. Rex barked once, taking 2 careful steps back before circling the cracked area, pacing as if outlining the boundaries of whatever lay under the ice. Caleb noticed the pattern. Not random, deliberate. The dog was drawing a perimeter. Something was alive beneath the surface, or something had been there recently. Caleb stood, rubbing the back of his neck. His father's knife in his coat pocket felt warmer suddenly, as though reacting to the pocket of air rising from the crack. "You're telling me this means something, aren't you?" Rex walked to his side, nudged his hand, then returned to the cracked patch. He barked again, louder this time, a command rather than a warning. Caleb crouched and looked through the fractured edge. A faint plume of warm vapor drifted upward, curling into the cold air like the last breath of a buried room. This wasn't just a cave. It was connected to something older, something hidden. Perhaps something meant to be found. "All right," Caleb whispered. "I hear you." But when he made a move to edge closer, Rex blocked him, planting his body firmly between Caleb and the thinner section of ice. No aggression, no panic, just absolute refusal. Caleb let out a slow exhale. Rex wasn't saying no, he was saying, "Not yet." A shiver crawled down Caleb's spine, not from cold, from recognition. Rex wasn't just reacting anymore, he was leading, and whatever waited under that ice was the reason they had been drawn to these mountains in the first place. The wind rose before sunrise, sweeping across the ravine in long, low currents that made the branches tremble. Caleb woke to the sound of Rex pacing outside the half-built cabin, nails scratching against frozen dirt, breath forming steady clouds in the dim light. Rex wasn't anxious. He was listening. When Caleb stepped outside, the dog froze at the edge of the clearing and barked. Not a frantic bark. Not fear. 3 sharp beats, evenly spaced, almost like a pattern. A call and response with something Caleb couldn't hear. "What is it now, boy?" Caleb whispered. Rex barked again. Same rhythm. Then he bolted toward the ravine. Caleb's heart lurched. He grabbed his coat and followed. The ice along the creek had shifted overnight. New cracks fanned across the surface like pale lightning trapped under glass. Steam rose faintly from the widest fracture. Warmth again. Impossible warmth. Rex circled the fissure, nose inches from the ice, body angled as if urging Caleb closer. The morning sun had not yet crested the ridge, casting the ravine in a cold, violet shade that made everything look older, deeper, heavier. Caleb crouched. This time he didn't let his fear anchor his feet. "All right, show me." Rex stepped back, letting him approach. Caleb brushed frost away and peered through the largest crack. The void beneath was wider than he'd realized. The ice above it seemed suspended, a thin ceiling guarding something hidden. The faint echo he'd heard yesterday drifted upward again, softer now. Or maybe he was only imagining it. Memory had a way of filling silence with its own ghosts. He pressed his glove flat against the ice and closed his eyes. 37 years ago, his father had walked into a storm much like this one. He remembered the last night clearly. The house creaked under the wind. His father, tall, silent, smelling of pine resin and cold air, didn't look back when he closed the door. He was supposed to check the trapline and be home by dawn. He never returned. Search teams combed the ridge. Dogs lost the scent at a frozen creek. People said the mountains swallowed him. Snow buried his tracks, and time buried everything else. Caleb had learned to stop asking, but he never stopped wondering. Now the mountain felt like it was answering back. Rex gave a low growl, stepped closer to another crack in the ice, and began scratching at the frost carefully. Precisely. Caleb moved beside him, using the flat edge of his father's knife to scrape a clearer opening. Something brown poked through first, then a frayed strand, then more. He pulled gently. A rope. Old, stiff, weather-burned. The fibers crumbled slightly in his hand. It had been there for years. Maybe decades. Caleb's pulse picked up. He cleared more ice, revealing the rope trailing down into the hollow beneath. Attached to it was a metal clasp and a fragment of canvas. Military grade. He leaned closer. Frost fogged his breath. Rex barked again. Same 3-beat rhythm. A warning? Or an announcement? Caleb steadied himself and crawled across the ice toward another section where Rex had stationed himself. There, lodged between frozen stones, was a charred mark. Pitch black. Smooth at the edges, the kind flame left behind after burning slow and hot. Someone had built a fire down here. Recently or long ago, he didn't know. But the soot was protected from weather. Preserved. Caleb ran his thumb over it and felt the truth settle into him like a weight. This wasn't just a creek. This was a hiding place. A shelter. Someone had lived here. Rex's growl shifted pitch, pulling Caleb's attention farther downstream. The dog paced toward a thin outcropping of ice where snow had drifted strangely, leaving a mound that didn't match the slope beneath. Caleb approached carefully. The ice felt different here. Softer. Hollow beneath the surface. Rex scratched once, then backed away. Caleb knelt and brushed off the top layer of snow. Something green glinted through the frost. Fabric. He pried it free. A piece of jacket. Thick, insulated, the kind issued for winter survival training. Torn along the seam. The faded patch on the shoulder was unmistakable. A military insignia. Caleb stared until the cold stung his eyes. His father had served before he was born. Not long, just enough to know mountain survival better than anyone in Cedar Ridge. When he disappeared, rumors spread that he had gone back to something he once knew. Something secret. Something unresolved. Caleb forced himself to breathe. He turned the fabric over in his hands, rubbing the edge where it had clearly been ripped. Not cut. Torn by force. Rex sniffed the cloth, bristled, and let out a quiet, mournful sound. Almost like recognition. Or sorrow. Who was here? Caleb whispered. And why did they hide under the ice? The wind shifted again, carrying with it a faint echo from below, a pulse or thump that made the hairs on Caleb's arms rise. Rex stepped forward, looked into the darkness beneath the ice, and barked once. Caleb swallowed hard. Every instinct told him he was standing on top of a story that hadn't finished being written. Something or someone had used this place. Maybe recently. Maybe years ago. Maybe someone who never made it out. Maybe someone who didn't want to be found. He closed his fist around the torn piece of jacket. The mountain hadn't swallowed his father. It had kept his secrets frozen in its throat. And now, one by one, Rex was digging them back up. The sun had barely cleared the ridge when Rex stiffened. One moment he was trotting beside Caleb as they gathered fallen branches. The next he halted, muscles coiled, nose pointed towards the deeper stretch of pines. "What now?" Caleb whispered. Rex didn't bark. He moved. Slow, deliberate steps, following a scent invisible to anyone else. Caleb followed, instinct tightening his chest. 20 yards into the trees, Rex stopped beside a fallen log dusted with frost. His nose pressed to the snow. Caleb crouched next to him and saw it. Blood. A thin smear. Then another a few inches away. Not much, but fresh. Rex's ears flattened slightly, not in fear but recognition. He lifted his head, sniffed the air, and glanced left, toward a cluster of young pines at the base of a narrow slope. Caleb swallowed and moved forward. Behind the pines, curled against the trunk of a tree, was a boy. 17, maybe. Thin. Jacket torn at the sleeve. Lips blue with cold. Snow crusted in his hair. For a moment Caleb thought he might be dead, but then the boy's fingers twitched. Caleb dropped to his knees. "Hey, kid, can you hear me?" The boy's eyes cracked open, pale, unfocused, then suddenly sharp with fear as he saw Rex step forward. No dogs," the boy rasped. Rex froze, then did something Caleb didn't expect. He sat, perfectly calm, no growl, no hostile stance, just a patient, steady presence. Caleb touched the boy's shoulder. "Easy, he's not going to hurt you. If he wanted to, he would have already." The boy blinked slowly, gaze moving from Caleb to Rex and back again. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. The boy hesitated, as if deciding whether answering was safe. "Mason," he murmured. "Mason Price." "All right, Mason. You're bleeding. We need to get you warm." Mason tried to push himself upright, winced, and sucked in a sharp breath. Caleb saw the injury now, a shallow gash along the ribs, dried blood stiffening the fabric of his shirt. Not life-threatening, but long exposure to the cold could turn anything deadly. Caleb hooked his arms under the kid's shoulders. Mason flinched. "Easy. I've got you. Let's get you back to my cabin." Mason's gaze darted around the forest. "No, not there. They'll see me." "Who?" Silence. Mason's breathing quickened until Rex stepped in, touching his nose gently to the boy's hand. Mason froze again, but this time his eyes softened. "He's not barking," Mason whispered, almost surprised. "Dogs always bark at me." "Not this one," Caleb replied. "He only barks when something's wrong." Mason shut his eyes briefly. Then he let Caleb lift him to his feet. The hike back to the clearing took longer than usual. Caleb half-carried Mason over patches of ice, Rex always a few steps ahead, checking the path, doubling back to make sure they were still coming. When the cabin came into view, Mason tensed again. "I shouldn't have come near it," he muttered. "I shouldn't have been anywhere close." "Near what?" Caleb asked. Mason didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the frozen creek. "The cave," he whispered. "They found it. I wasn't supposed to be there." Caleb felt a chill unrelated to the cold. "Who found it?" But Mason shook his head violently. "Not here." Inside the cabin, the fire crackled weakly. Caleb eased the boy onto a pile of blankets and peeled away the outer layer of his torn jacket. While he boiled water and cleaned the wound, Mason watched Rex as though the dog were the only stable thing in the room. Rex lay down beside him, close, but not imposing. Every few minutes he lifted his head, sniffed Mason's breath, then rested again, as if monitoring him. Caleb stitched the shallow tear along the ribs with shaking fingers he tried to steady. "Mason," he said quietly. "Someone hurt you?" Mason didn't look up. "I fell. You didn't fall on a knife." Mason clenched his jaw. "All right," Caleb murmured. "We'll talk later. For now, you're safe." Mason's eyes flicked toward the doorway. "No one's safe out here." Caleb felt the weight of that truth settle heavy in the room. The kid ate in small bites, hands trembling around the tin cup. When he finished, exhaustion pulled him under so quickly he didn't have time to fight it. He fell asleep against Rex's side, the dog remaining still as stone. Caleb sat across from them, elbows on his knees, watching firelight play across the boy's face. Mason Price. A name he'd never heard. A kid who knew about the cave. A kid someone might be chasing. Rex's ears twitched. His eyes opened and met Caleb's. "Yeah, I know," Caleb whispered. "This changes everything." Rex lowered his head back onto his paws, gaze drifting to the door as if expecting someone to appear there at any moment. The storm began again outside, wind scraping at the roof, snow hissing against the canvas. But for the first time since Caleb had come to the mountains, the cabin didn't feel empty. 3 bodies, 1 fire, a fragile peace, a man who'd lost everything, a dog who knew more than he let on, and a boy running from a truth buried deep under the ice. The cabin wasn't finished. The walls gapped, the roof sagged, the wind still crept through the seams, but somehow tonight it felt like a home. The storm announced itself long before it struck. A low groan rolled through the pines, a warning carried on the wind that made Rex lift his head from sleep and stand rigid in the darkness. Caleb felt the pressure shift in the air even before the first gust hit the cabin, rattling the unfinished walls like something trying to claw its way inside. Rex barked once, sharp and panicked. Caleb jolted upright. "What is it, boy?" The dog didn't wait for him. Rex lunged toward the door, barking in a rapid, frantic rhythm Caleb had never heard from him. A sound edged with pure alarm. Snow hammered the canvas roof. The fire guttered. Mason stirred on his bedroll, half awake. "Storm's hitting early," Caleb muttered, bracing the wall as another gust slammed into the frame. But Rex wasn't warning about the storm. He was warning about the cabin. A thunderous crack split the night. The ridge beam above them snapped clean through. The roof sagged, groaned, and collapsed in a cascade of snow and timber. Caleb shoved Mason aside, but the falling beam struck Caleb's shoulder, driving him to the ground. Pain flared white-hot. Snow buried half his torso. He gasped, trying to push himself free, but the weight pinned him. Rex launched himself into the debris, teeth clamping onto Caleb's jacket. The dog pulled with a strength that didn't match his size. Caleb felt himself slide an inch, then another. The beam shifted just enough. Caleb twisted, rolled free as the rest of the roof caved inward in a roaring crash. Mason scrambled to his knees. "Are you okay?" Caleb clutched his shoulder, breath ragged. "I'll live!" Another crack echoed outside. The storm intensified, howling down the ravine like a living thing. "We have to get out," Caleb said, but they never got the chance. The ground buckled beneath Mason's feet. Snow along the creek path gave way in a sudden whoosh, swallowing him whole. One moment he stood ankle-deep in snow, the next he vanished into the earth. Mason! His scream rose through the storm, sharp, terrified. Rex leapt after him without hesitation. "Rex! No!" Caleb staggered forward, slipping on ice as he reached the collapsed patch beside the creek. Beneath the broken crust lay a vertical chute of jagged blue ice, descending into darkness. Rex's bark rose from below. Caleb forced himself to breathe through the pain and swung his legs over the edge. He lowered himself down, gripping a protruding ridge of ice, then dropped into the narrow shaft. Cold swallowed him. The walls shimmered with frozen veins of light. The chute angled sharply, and he slid the last few feet, landing hard on an icy floor. The sound of water echoed faintly. Dim light filtered from cracks above, casting the cavern in a pale blue glow like moonlight trapped under glass. Rex stood ahead of him, hackles raised, gaze fixed on something deeper in the cave. Mason sat slumped against the wall, winded but conscious. His hands shook uncontrollably. "I'm okay," he whispered, but he wasn't. His eyes held something old and fearful. Caleb crouched beside him. "Why were you so afraid of the cave?" Mason didn't answer. His gaze drifted past Caleb toward a shadowed alcove in the ice. Caleb followed his line of sight. The alcove was small, carved into the cave wall, almost hidden by a curtain of frost. Inside, half buried under drifted snow, lay remnants of a campsite. A metal cup, a bundle of sticks used for kindling, a cracked survival knife, and carved into the ice above the alcove, nearly erased by time, were 2 words: Owen Price. Mason's breath hitched, his hands clenched in his lap. Caleb felt the air leave his lungs. Owen Price, Mason's older brother, presumed dead during a winter search and rescue mission 2 years earlier. Caleb turned slowly. Mason looked impossibly young in the blue light, trembling not from the cold, but from the truth he had tried to outrun. "You think he's alive?" Caleb said quietly. Mason didn't nod. He didn't have to. "I came looking for him," Mason whispered. "The night I found the rope. I heard something from below, like someone knocking. I tried to come back, but they were watching. The people who said he died. They didn't want anyone near the cave." Caleb felt the temperature of the cave shift, not colder, but heavier. Like the mountain itself was listening. Rex stepped forward, nose close to the alcove. He sniffed the survival knife, then the burned patch of rock, then the ropes hanging from the ceiling like relics of a vanished person. He did not bark. Instead, he pressed his paw against the carving in the wall. Owen Price. Caleb swallowed hard. Someone had lived here long enough to leave signs. Someone resourceful, trained, desperate to survive. Someone who might still be close. A faint sound echoed from the deeper chamber, a single, muted knock. Mason flinched. Rex spun toward the darkness and barked, the sound sharp enough to ricochet off the ice walls. Caleb stood, pulse racing. That came from further in. Another knock. Rhythmical. 3 beats. Exactly like Rex's warning pattern that morning. Rex looked back at them as if saying, "Now you understand." Caleb stepped into the deeper tunnel. The ice beneath his boots vibrated with the faintest hum, and warm air drifted upward again, carrying a scent unfamiliar and out of place. Smoke. Not old smoke. Recent. Someone down here was burning something to stay alive. Someone was near. Caleb turned to Mason, voice low and steady. "We're not alone in this cave." Mason's fear cracked open into something more fragile. Hope. Rex barked once, poised at Caleb's side. The mountain had hidden a truth for years. Tonight, it had started giving pieces back. Snow had barely stopped falling when the sound of an engine echoed up the mountain road. Caleb, still shaken from the night in the cave, stepped outside the cabin. Mason hovered behind him, pale but awake. Rex stood ahead of both of them, ears pinned forward, tail rigid. A county SUV pushed through the snowdrifts and stopped a few yards from the destroyed cabin. Sheriff Dana Collins stepped out, her boots crunching on the ice. She was tall, sharp-eyed, and carried herself like someone who'd seen more winters than paperwork. Caleb felt his chest tighten. She wasn't here for a friendly visit. Mason whispered, "She's looking for me. I shouldn't have come back." "Stay behind me," Caleb said. Sheriff Collins scanned the scene. Half-collapsed cabin. Makeshift repairs. A man with a blood-stained shoulder. And a teenage boy who matched every missing person notice across the county. Her hand dropped to her holster. "Ray Donovan Caleb Moore?" she asked, voice clipped. Caleb straightened. "Yes, Ma'am." She nodded toward Mason. "That boy's been missing for 3 days. You want to explain why he's here? Or why you're living in a wrecked cabin miles from anyone?" Mason shrank back. Caleb opened his mouth to answer. But Rex moved first. He walked straight toward the sheriff. Dana stiffened as the dog approached, her hand still hovering over her weapon. But Rex didn't growl, didn't bare his teeth. He stopped inches from her jacket, sniffed the fabric, then sat calmly at her feet. Caleb blinked. The sheriff's expression cracked for a moment. Surprise, then something softer, older, a memory. "Well now," she murmured, "that's a hell of a greeting." Rex looked up at her, steady and sure, as if giving a verdict. "He trusts you," Caleb said quietly. "He doesn't do that with everyone." Sheriff Collins exhaled, tension deflating from her shoulders. She finally removed her hand from her holster. "All right," she said. "Tell me what's going on." Inside the cabin, with what remained of the walls shielding them from the wind, Mason recounted what he could. The rope, the cave, the feeling someone was watching him, the belief that Owen had never died. Dana listened without interrupting. Her jaw tightened at Owen's name. When he finished, she stood and paced the length of the room. "Most folks never knew the full story," she said. "Owen Price wasn't just some backwoods hiker who got lost. He was part of our mountain rescue unit. One of the best we ever had. He saved more people in one winter than most do in 5 years." Mason looked up sharply. "Why wasn't that in the report?" "Because the report was garbage," she said flatly. "They rushed it. Called him dead after 72 hours. No thorough sweep, no proper search grid. They blamed weather, blamed funding. But my gut always said something was off." Caleb studied her face. This wasn't a sheriff defending her department. This was a woman still angry about a brother-in-arms left behind. "You think he survived?" Caleb asked. Dana hesitated. "The storm 2 years ago was brutal. I don't know what happened under that ice. But I'll tell you this much. A man like Owen doesn't go down easy, and he sure as hell doesn't die without leaving a trail." She looked at Mason. "And if you heard knocking in that cave, you didn't imagine it." Mason swallowed hard. Someone else was down there. Rex let out a soft whine, pacing to the doorway, then glancing back at them. Caleb recognized the pattern. It was the same behavior Rex had shown before finding the tin box, before the roof collapse, before the cave revealed itself. "He's telling us we're not done," Caleb said. Sheriff Collins walked outside, staring toward the frozen creek. Her breath streamed in front of her like smoke. "There's something you haven't told me," she said. Mason froze. Caleb studied him. Mason's hands clenched into fists. His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Someone else is looking for the cave." Dana turned. "Who?" Mason's eyes filled with fear. "The same people who shut down Owen's search. They said the cave wasn't real, that it was too dangerous. But I saw them there last week. They were digging. They don't want anyone finding whatever Owen left behind." Sheriff Collins swore under her breath. Caleb felt the air thicken again, the same foreboding weight from inside the ice tunnels. Dana looked at Rex as if consulting him. The old shepherd stepped forward, nudged her hand once, then stared toward the creek. Decision made. Sheriff Collins squared her shoulders. "All right, I'm not here to arrest anyone. I'm here to get answers. And if Owen is somewhere in that mountain, alive or dead, we're going to find out what happened to him." She turned to Caleb. but I'm going to need your help. This terrain's no place for a deputy who's afraid of falling through ice." Caleb nodded. "And Rex?" She smiled faintly. "Rex leads the way." Outside, wind swept snow across the clearing, erasing footprints almost as fast as they were made. But Rex stood firm at the edge of the creek, tail stiff, eyes fixed on the faint seam where the cave's breath warmed the frozen air. A quiet signal, a call to move. Sheriff Collins stepped beside Caleb, the three of them forming an unlikely front. "Let's go find your brother," she told Mason. "And let's find out who's been covering up his trail." The storm clouds parted just enough for a thin line of light to spill across the ice, and Rex was already moving. By the time the first thaw touched the Sawtooth Range, the story of the ice cave had already outrun the storm that nearly killed them. Word drifted down through Cedar Ridge like a rumor carried on warm breath. A hidden cavern. A rescue dog who sensed what others missed. A missing boy found alive. And a name carved into blue ice that the mountain had kept hidden for years. People began to arrive slowly at first, then in steady waves. Families who'd lost loved ones in blizzards, hikers who never got answers about relatives who vanished on ridge trails, retired search and rescue workers who wanted one more crack at a mystery that had kept them awake at night. Caleb watched their faces, the hope, the fear, the quiet desperation, while Mason hammered new boards into the cabin's frame. Together, they rebuilt the broken structure into something sturdier, warmer, more deliberate. Sheriff Dana Collins brought donated insulation from town. A group of veterans delivered plywood and canned food. Someone else dropped off 2 sleeping bags with a note. For whoever needs warmth next. By late spring, the cabin was no longer a lonely outpost. It was becoming a refuge. Mason stood beside the creek one morning, watching the new arrivals pitch tents under the pines. "I never thought people would come here," he murmured. Caleb set down a bundle of logs. "Places like this don't call crowds. They call the right people." Rex trotted past them, heading toward the cracked seam where the cave opened beneath the snowmelt. His tail was high, steps purposeful. A team of volunteer rescuers waited beside the opening, ropes coiled around their shoulders, helmets strapped tight. They had asked Caleb for access to retrieve Owen Price's effects, but they were all waiting on one final green light. Rex. The shepherd paused at the lip of the cave, nose testing the air. The ice no longer groaned with danger, but it held memory, a tension Caleb could feel in his bones. Rex lowered his head, sniffing the descent. Then he looked back at Caleb and gave a single bark. Permission. That was all the team needed. They clipped in and began their slow descent into the shimmering blue darkness. Caleb stood at the edge with Mason, both gripping the safety railing Dana had ordered installed the previous week. Rex remained between them, gaze fixed on the rope as it vanished into the shadows. Minutes passed. Then a call echoed from below. We found it. The rescuers emerged one by one, carrying waterproof containers sealed with frost. Inside the first box were old flares, a rusted compass, a carved toggle with initials OP, and a strip of cloth torn from a winter parka. Then came the second container. This one they handled gingerly. A journal, frozen stiff along the edges but intact. Mason's breath caught. Is it his? Caleb didn't answer. He knew. Sheriff Collins arrived in time to see Mason clutch the journal with both hands. Together they opened the first page. The ink had bled in some areas, but the writing was unmistakably deliberate. A strong hand, a clear mind. Day 12. If someone finds this, follow the markers. I left them for a reason. Mason's voice trembled. He was alive. He was really alive down there. Collins placed a steady hand on his shoulder. He didn't stop fighting. The next note read, My radio died. Storms keep shifting the ice. If I can't get out, I'll leave a way for someone else to. No one disappears without a trace, not if we leave each other signposts. Caleb felt a tightness in his throat. This wasn't the writing of a man surrendering to the mountain. This was a man trying to map hope, even as the mountain closed in on him. Rex nudged the journal, then looked toward the deeper section of the cave. Caleb understood the message. There might be more. Clues Owen had left behind on purpose. Enough to build a full picture. Enough to give closure to others who still waited. And that was how the mission began. Every few days, Rex would lead a small team back into the ice. Searchers, volunteers, a medic, sometimes Mason, sometimes Dana. Together, they charted the cave's branching corridors, marked safe paths, and recovered artifacts that had lain untouched for years. A torn glove, a broken headlamp, a neatly tied bundle of fishing hooks, each item catalogued, photographed, and placed in the cabin's newly built storage room. They weren't just collecting Owen Price's life. They were honoring every life the mountain had swallowed. By midsummer, hikers arrived not in fear, but in solidarity. Families brought photos of missing relatives, pinning them to a wooden board outside the cabin. A teacher from Idaho brought her classroom to learn winter survival basics. A former ranger helped install a solar water heater. Someone donated a radio tower. And through it all, Rex became something of a guide. The dog walked visitors along the creek edge, paused by the safe descent point, then circled the tents as if checking the perimeter of a town only he truly understood. People began calling him the Shepherd of Sawtooth. Caleb didn't argue. It wasn't wrong. Late one evening, when the last group had headed down the trail, Mason sat on the porch with the journal in his hands. The sunset burned orange across the ice line. "You think Owen wanted me to find this?" he asked quietly. Caleb lowered himself beside him. "He didn't want you to find his death." Mason looked up. "He wanted you to find his purpose," Caleb continued. "To finish what he started. To help the people nobody else looked for." Mason closed the journal gently, almost reverently. Rex laid his head on the boy's knee, eyes half-lidded, watching the forest the way he always did. The mountain had taken much from all of them. Homes, brothers, certainty. But now, in the quiet aftermath, it was giving something back. A community, a purpose, a place where the lost could be named. And a shepherd, four-legged, loyal, tireless, who guarded every step forward. Summer thinned into a brittle, glassy autumn, the kind that made the mountains glow pale blue at dawn. Cedar Ridge had begun referring to the rebuilt cabin not as the old shack on the ridge, but as Frostlight Shelter. Mason chose the name. Caleb agreed without hesitation. It fit, light carved out of the cold, hope stitched out of broken winters. The place grew in ways neither of them expected. A donated pot-belly stove, a bunk loft built by a group of retired carpenters who insisted on paying Caleb with pie and old hunting stories. A worn sign at the trail entrance painted by a middle school art class. "You are not lost. Here." Every morning, Caleb woke to the same sound. Rex padding from cot to cot, checking on whoever had arrived during the night. Homeless teens, veterans drifting through the state, runaways who had nowhere else to go. Rex never barked at them, never needed to. He read their fear the way others read weather. He was becoming the soul of the shelter. Mason had changed too. The boy who once trembled at his own shadow now hauled lumber, cooked for newcomers, and held quiet conversations with kids younger than him who'd walked out of lives too hard to name. He taped a photo of his brother Owen above the fireplace. Under it, he wrote a message in charcoal. "You left a trail. We're following it." Caleb caught him staring at those words sometimes, not with grief anymore, but with direction. One morning, frost clung to the pines like salt on old wounds. Caleb went outside to split wood, but Rex intercepted him halfway to the shed. The shepherd planted himself in the path, stiff-legged, chest low, head tilted toward the clearing near the creek. "What is it?" Caleb asked. Rex didn't move. His breath formed pale circles in the cold air. Then he turned and trotted towards the creek, glancing back as if urging Caleb to keep up. Caleb followed. The creek had begun its slow freeze again, the edges sealed with milky ice while the center still trickled beneath. The sun hit the surface and scattered light like shattered glass. Rex stopped beside a mound of frozen runoff, where a small protrusion, something dark, pressed against the melting ice. Caleb knelt and brushed snow away. Beneath the thin crust was a metal object, half embedded, half exposed. The ice had preserved it like a memory the mountain hadn't decided to release until now. Rex whined softly, pressing his nose to the ice, then stepped back. Caleb used his father's old survival knife to chip at the edges until the ice fractured with a dull crack. He lifted the object carefully. A lighter. Slim. Cold. The metal worn in places but unmistakably familiar. He turned it over in his palm. On the underside, faint but still legible, were engraved letters. Monsieur Senior Caleb's breath left him. His father's initials. The same lighter his father carried every day. The one he claimed had saved him during a winter search and rescue mission decades earlier. The one he'd had on him the night he disappeared. Caleb stood still for a long moment, feeling the world shift under his boots. Not violently, not in fear. More like a door opening in a room he hadn't known existed. "You did this," he whispered to Rex. "You brought me here." Rex sat, ears forward, eyes steady. He didn't wag his tail. This wasn't a discovery he celebrated. It was one he respected. Caleb closed his hand around the lighter. For years he'd accepted the official story. Lost in the storm. Body never recovered. The mountain had taken him. But now the truth was colder. Sharper. His father had been here. In this valley, near this cave. Near Owen. Their lives had intersected somehow, beneath ice and years of silence. Rex stepped closer, nudging Caleb's knee as if reminding him to breathe. Mason approached from behind, panting from the climb up the slope. Rex took off. I figured he found something. He stopped when he saw Caleb's face. "You okay?" Caleb opened his fist and showed him the lighter. Mason blinked. "Is that?" "My father's," Caleb said quietly. "The night he disappeared, he had this in his pocket." Mason absorbed the words, then looked at Rex, who held his gaze unblinking. "You think the cave connects things?" Mason asked. "Your dad. Owen." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't have to. The mountain had been holding stories for decades, some of them tragic, some unfinished, some waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep digging. He stared at the lighter again. The metal warmed slowly in his hand, thawing into something almost alive. "We build this place for kids like you," Caleb said, "for people looking for a way out. But maybe it's also a way back, for him, for me." Mason nodded, eyes softening. "Then we keep going. We follow whatever Rex finds." Caleb looked at the shepherd, who rose with a low huff, shook frost from his coat, and turned toward the line of trees. His stride was confident, decisive, like a dog who already knew the answer, but understood humans needed time to catch up. When they returned to Frostlight Shelter, the sun was dipping behind the ridge, washing the cabin in amber light. A young woman, maybe 19, sat on the steps, hugging her backpack like a shield. She looked lost, exhausted, and scared in that way you could only recognize after living it yourself. Mason knelt beside her. "You hungry?" She shook her head, but her eyes said yes. Caleb stepped inside to heat soup. When he came back, Rex was sitting beside her, leaning just enough to let her know she wasn't alone, but not enough to overwhelm. She hesitated, then rested one hand on his fur. Rex stayed perfectly still, letting her decide the pace. Caleb watched her shoulders drop, tension melting in tiny breaths. Rex had chosen her, approved her, which meant she stayed. As the first stars pierced the thinning sky, Caleb stood at the doorway of Frostlight Shelter, lighter in his pocket, Rex at his side, Mason helping the new girl settle in. Legacy didn't always come from what people built. Sometimes it came from what the mountain returned, from the things buried beneath ice, from a dog who refused to let the truth stay frozen. And as the wind shifted across the ridge, Caleb felt it clearly. A new purpose was taking shape, one carved by those who had been lost, and one guided by a shepherd who never stopped finding what others couldn't see. The first snow of winter came early that year, drifting down in slow, deliberate flakes that softened every edge of the Sawtooth Range. Frostlight Shelter hummed with quiet. Life! Someone chopped wood out back. Someone else boiled soup in the kitchen. Voices rose and fell like low campfire murmurs. And Rex, older now, greyer around the muzzle, lay on his favorite spot near the porch steps, eyes half closed, but never fully off duty. His ears still twitched at every shift in the wind. Age had slowed his bones, not his instinct. A school bus rumbled up the trail and stopped near the clearing. A dozen students stepped out, bundled in heavy coats, breath puffing into the air. Their civics teacher had requested a tour, but what they really wanted was a story. The story everyone whispered about online. The man, the boy, and the shepherd who found a world under the ice. Mason greeted them first. 16 months had passed since Caleb carried him into the cabin half-frozen. Now he stood taller, steadier, shoulders filling out from hard work and harder truth. The kids gathered around him with notebooks ready. One girl raised her hand. "Is it true you lived in the cave, or your brother did?" Mason smiled faintly. "It's true my brother left a trail that saved my life, and Rex followed it before anyone else could." They scribbled, wide-eyed, hungry for details. Behind them, Caleb stepped outside, wiping sawdust from his hands. He moved more slowly these days. The mountain carved people as much as it revealed them. But his voice carried that same quiet certainty the students seemed to absorb without understanding why. Another student, a boy with freckles and a hesitant voice, stepped forward. "Why do you think Rex found the cave in the first place?" The group fell silent. Rex shifted at the sound of his name and lifted his head. His eyes, still sharp, still storm-colored, found Caleb's without needing a cue. Caleb knelt beside him, resting a hand on the shepherd's shoulder. The chill bit through his glove, but Rex leaned into him, warm, steady, the same way he had during the storm that nearly took them all. He wasn't looking for danger, Caleb said softly. Not once. He was looking for the truth I'd buried for years. The words hung in the cold air, simple but heavy. Some of the kids seemed to understand. Others wouldn't until life bruised them in their own ways. Caleb continued. "Dogs don't search for adventure. They search for the things we're too scared to face. Sometimes that's danger. Sometimes it's grief. And sometimes—" He looked at Mason. "Sometimes it's the part of ourselves we thought we lost." Rex blinked, laid his chin on Caleb's knee, then looked toward the creek where the cave entrance lay sealed for the season under a fresh crust of ice. A cracking sound echoed faintly across the clearing. One of the girls gasped. A thin fracture line spread across the flat sheet of ice, subtle, almost delicate, like the mountain exhaling after holding its breath too long. Not dangerous, not a collapse, more like a reminder. Something lived beneath the surface of the world. Memory, truth, echoes of those who walked before them. And sometimes it took a dog to hear it first. The students moved to the edge of the clearing to take pictures of the ice ridge, murmuring excitedly. Mason stood with them, explaining how the snowmelt shifted each season, how Owen's journal had mapped passages no one else knew existed. Caleb stayed beside Rex, combing fingers through the dog's thick fur. "You're still watching," he whispered. Rex gave a slow exhale, the kind that sounded almost like agreement. A few minutes later, the teacher signaled that it was time to gather for a final question. The students circled back around Caleb. "So," one boy said, holding his phone ready, though he'd been told not to record, "if you could tell people just one thing about what happened here, what would it be?" Caleb stood, placing one last steadying hand on Rex's back. "That the mountain didn't save us," he said. "Rex did, and he did it by refusing to let silence bury what mattered." The boy lowered his phone, eyes wide. The group nodded without speaking. The camera of the story pulled back, rising above frostlight shelter, above the pines, above the shimmering white ribbon of early winter. As it lifted, the fracture in the ice caught the last of the sun, glowing faintly like a path waiting to be found. Not threatening, inviting. Some mysteries weren't meant to stay hidden forever. Caleb looked at the students, then at the invisible audience who would one day hear this story. His voice softened, carried by the wind. "And now," he said, "I guess the question is yours. What's your story with a loyal pet? If this one stirred something in you, something buried, something remembered, share it. Tell someone. Keep the memory moving. And if you believe shepherds like Rex deserve their place in the world, support the channel. German shepherds are guardians by nature, but stories keep their legacy alive. Thanks for being part of it."